Hello and welcome to Season 2, Episode 28 of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
We are, of course, reading Jake Jackson's Myths and Legends, a book about world mythologies from around the world. This time we are covering the Norse creation myths. We finished up our section on Native American myths, so we're moving into the Norse section, some of my all-time favorite myths. These chapters also seem a bit shorter than the last ones, at least this one was, so hopefully, maybe, possibly, this episode will be a little shorter, but who knows? We might find a lot of things to talk about these. Like I said, these are some of my favorites, so I have a lot of thoughts, but what do you think of this section overall? What do you think of the Norse myths? Maybe give some comments on the introduction he gives to this chapter.
Sure. I don't know if you noticed, but he made pains to point out how the Vikings were illiterates. And how it's hard to know what their real beliefs were because they didn't really have a written language for a very long period of time, and so these are handed down, like word of mouth, oral history stories. I don't remember those things mentioned in the Native American introduction, and how fierce and unforgiving the Vikings were to their neighbors. French coastline and the English coastline. There was not a similar description of some of the Native American tribes. So I thought that was jarring, going from one to the other. Now, if there was an intervening chapter, I might have forgotten how deferential the author was to the illiterate nomads of North America as opposed to the illiterate nomadic peoples of Scandinavia.
I figured you were going to say something like that. I appreciate your thoughts there. I like the introduction to this. I mean, of course, keeping in mind the comments that you made, but it is important to note that a lot of our sources for Norse mythology, like a lot of other mythologies, were handed down after the mythologies had basically already died. In this case, about a couple hundred years after the real Christianization of Scandinavia and Northern Europe, we finally got some, at least as far as we know, the surviving documents, some of these Norse myths written down in the Elder Edda or the Poetic Edda and the Prose Edda. In about the 1200s, they're assumed to be dated around that time. I've read both of those, so Norse mythology is one of the things that I'm at least more knowledgeable about than other mythologies, so I'm really looking forward to this section. Very, very, very good books. If you ever have time, you should read the Eddas. I really highly recommend the Eddas.
Oh, my spare time, I think I will.
You should. They're very good. They hold up really well. They're exciting reads.
I believe that it is 10 times more likely that I will compose my own Edda than I will read the Poetic Edda of Norse mythology.
The Poetic Edda is one of my favorite books, actually. I really, really like that book.
For real?
Yes, for real.
How long is it?
It's not terribly long, really.
A couple hundred pages or something? Or?
It's a little bit more. I mean, I don't know off the top of my head, but it's not like a massive, long, epic mythological text. But it's good. It's very good. I recommend it. All right, I guess we should go ahead and move into the stories.
Well, before you get into that, I'm going to interrupt.
Of course.
I am looking forward to your comments because this is going to be really our control discussion about that I will use as a reference to all the other mythology chapters. Because if you are not satisfied with the summaries of the myths, knowing that you've read the Edda and you're knowledgeable on the subject, I'll have a better idea if the summaries on everything else that I don't know about is good. What do you think?
There was one spot, we'll get to it when we talk about the story, that I was kind of iffy about, his summary there. But everything else held up really well. All the details were there. Everything was in order. But aside from one little thing, it's not really a major thing. But we'll get there when we talk about that. I'll mention that a little bit.
About Captain Marvel?
What?
I don't know. I was making a Thor reference.
Oh.
Everybody hates Captain Marvel, don't they?
I'm not a fan of that movie, but I don't know if everybody hates her.
I don't know. I've never seen the movie.
No, you never saw Captain Marvel?
Never saw Captain Marvel.
I mean, it's okay. I mean, it's not terrible, but it's not the best Marvel movie. Yes. All right, well, Marvel movies aside, we should start discussing these stories. The first story is the creation of the universe.
You aren't going to go into the introduction first. You're just going to go right into the story.
I thought we covered the introduction. What else is there to cover in the introduction?
It doesn't really. I didn't know if you're going to. Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Unless you have any other thoughts about the introduction, you can talk about that.
No, that's okay. Let's go right in.
All right. So the first story, we begin at the beginning with the creation of the universe. Before anything existed, there was a great void, and two regions sprang into existence. Filheim, the land of fog, and Muspelheim, a land where the air blazed and burned. Where the two met, a river flowed into a void called Ginnungagap, where the river froze. It was here that the heat and the cold met, forming the ice giant Ymir, who was the greatest of all frost giants. Filheim had existed for many ages, and at its center sat the fountain Vergelmir, from which all rivers bubbled, and next to it was the fountain Elivagar, which bubbled forth a poisonous mass which became black ice, for goodness can never be black. Muspel was guarded by the fire giant Surtur, who lashed at the air with his giant saber, and he was the greatest of the fire giants, and Muspel itself meant home of the destroyers of the world. And in another side of Ginnungagap, the sparks from Surtur's sword caused the ice to drip. When they froze again, they formed Audhumla, the cow known as the Nourisher, and Ymir drank from the 4 rivers which flowed from her udders. Audhumla was a vast creature spreading across the void, and her legs held up the corners of space. Audhumla also needed sustenance, so she licked at the salt of the crusted ice, gradually revealing the form of a god inside the ice. And this was Buri, the producer, who had a glow from the fire and a purity and freshness from the ice. At this time Ymir slept, and the perspiration under his arms formed a daughter and a son, and from his feet was formed the giant Thrudgamir, who had 6 heads, and he created his own son, Bergelmir. Buri had a son named Bor, and the eternal battle between the gods and the giants began, for the giants represent evil, and the gods represent all that is good. By the close of each day there was a stalemate, and Bor married the giant Bestla, a daughter of Bolthor, the Thorn of Evil, and they had 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve, and with their combined power they killed Ymir, whose blood covered the earth. So this is kind of the first phase of the creation here, where you have all of these beings just kind of springing into existence, where the cold and the heat meet, and then from there the rest of the world will be explained in these next coming stories. What do you think of this origin story, the creation of the universe?
Why do I have to go first all the time?
Well, I just summarized the whole thing. I don't want to take up all the podcast, but what did you think?
You see a lot of commonalities, like with the sons of the gods killing the Titans, in this case the giant. I don't know if there's some. There seems to be. I don't know if maybe I have to read more into it, but like the number 3, like with the 3 sons, you see that in a lot of different mythologies. And then I saw later there's like wasn't the 12 kingdoms? I'm thinking, but like the 12.
There are 12 main deities, yeah, in Asgard.
Yeah, but of course there's different numbers and different myths. It just this kind of piques my interest to see if there's some sort of more or less universality about those kind of numbers, and just the light and the dark creation type story, very very similar to other myths. And that is kind of fascinating how many of them have that type of origin story where there's a break from a void, and you have light and day and that type of thing, or light and night.
Yeah, I mean it's even similar somewhat to the Christian creation myth. In Genesis, in the beginning there was just a void, and then everything was separated kind of by twos essentially. The light from the dark, the sea from the land, and that sort of thing. So definitely a lot of dualities in just various different creation myths. That's definitely kept up here, especially even just between the dichotomy between the gods and the giants, who, like I said, are just the representations of good and evil here. So just continuous dichotomies. And yeah, the number 3 is important here. It's important in Norse mythology kind of going forward too. We'll see another trio with Odin as one of the 3 again a little bit later on. But yeah, definitely dichotomies and trios are a big thing.
Big fans of the one of my favorite Schoolhouse Rock songs. 3 is a magic number. A man and a woman had a baby. You know that song?
Yeah, the Vikings actually wrote that one.
Oh my gosh. De La Soul sampled it.
Really? Oh yeah, you did tell me about that. I knew that.
Yep, nice. I have that on vinyl.
Of course you do. All right, the next story is the creation of the earth. Ymir's body was placed...
Hold on. My favorite song of Schoolhouse Rock. Do you know what it is?
I don't know.
Verb.
Verb. That's a good one.
Really a rock song.
Yes. Thank you for your thoughts on Schoolhouse Rock. I really appreciate it. The next story is the creation of the earth. Ymir's body was placed in the center of Ginnungagap, and his flesh became the earth, and his bones the rocky crags. And from the soil dwarfs spontaneously sprang forth. Ymir's teeth and shards of bones became the rocks, and his blood was cleared to form the water. His skull became the sky, and at each cardinal point a dwarf held it up, and these were Nordri, Sudri, Austri, and Westri. His brow became the walls that would protect the gods from evil creatures, and in the center of these brows sat Midgard, where humans could live safely. Nearly all the giants had drowned in Ymir's blood except Bergelmir, who fled in a boat with his wife to form Jotunheim, a land for new giants. Odin and his brothers had not completed their work. Ymir's brain became the clouds, and they took sparks from Surtur's blade to form the stars, which moved to record the seasons. The brightest stars were joined together to form the sun and the moon, and they were pulled in chariots by the horses Adrarkr, the early waker, and Alsvin, the rapid goer. So this is sort of the next phase of construction of creation, where they take all these parts of Ymir's body and just kind of form the physical aspects of the world, which is something that's actually kind of common in mythologies, maybe not necessarily a giant's body or that sort of thing. But I especially thought of Finnish mythology, actually, in which the world is created first by it was first just a big wide open sea, and you had this one goddess kind of just floating aimlessly in the sea until a bird rested on her head and laid an egg, and that egg fell and split in two, with the upper half of the egg becoming the sky, the lower half becoming all of the land and everything below, and like the yolk became the sun, I think, and the white became either the land or the clouds. But definitely, like, it's a common thing for like just physical things to form, big domes or the land and stuff. So it's interesting that is continued here. It's definitely one of my favorite sort of shaping of the earth stories, because you can kind of really see from the Norse people's point of view, just like looking around at mountains, like, oh, that looks like a rib, or looking at the ground, that looks like somebody's flesh after they've been dead for a long time. So it's kind of easy to see, this kind of makes sense where these ancient people were coming from.
Now you're gonna have to remind me. A previous episode, wasn't there a creation myth? Was it Chinese or was it Indian? Where they made certain things out of a dead body, somebody they killed. I can't remember.
No, I can't remember either. I'm sure it happened. I mean, like I said, it's very common in a lot of mythologies, so I'm sure you're not wrong, but I can't remember off the top of my head which one it was.
Yeah, it'll come back to me later.
I'm sure it will. But yeah, what are your other thoughts on this sort of next phase of creation?
Well, I'm going to go back to the previous section because
of course.
I want to say something that's completely inappropriate.
Oh, okay.
I just want to read, just make you uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
This sentence from the previous, I wasn't going to do it, but then I thought thought worse of it.
Yes, of course.
The creation of the universe, is it Elvagar? Elvagar, that's one of them, right? One of these.
One of the fountains?
Yeah, is the beginning of evil, for goodness can never be black.
Yes, I figured we would get a comment on that one, of course. Not racist, like I'm sure you're...
Norse mythology. That's a racist claim.
Oh my God. Again, another dichotomy between white and black, with white representing goodness.
All the rest of these Norse people. Anyway, that was just being stupid.
I understand.
I don't really have any thoughts on that. Any of these creation things, it's just kind of like, for me, it's just, they're kind of like Aesop's fables, or like good children's stories. You could literally, like you're kind of referencing, you can imagine a guy centuries ago around a campfire telling these kind of stories to the kids, and then say, well, there's the ribs up there, that type of thing. But I mean, I know I'm not trying to make light of it, but these creation things, I think they're neat to read, and but I don't know how much more I need to comment on them. It's just they're just other than that, there's a lot of similarities from one region to another. They're completely separate and presumably not referencing each other, but they kind of come up with very similar type theories as the creation of the universe.
Yeah, absolutely. That I kind of mentioned there, going back to, I mentioned this a couple episodes ago, but like Joseph Campbell or like Carl Jung, sort of the work of archetypes and, similar themes throughout mythologies. So it's almost like a question of, is this kind of a psychological thing that us humans are kind of just programmed to do? Do we like to just tell stories that have these common themes that pop up, all across the world, completely different cultures, but we'll find, oh, this is a similar character here, this is a similar storyline here, where presumably there's very little connection between the two. But it's like, do we just come up with these things because that's what we're designed to do? There's something just in our brains that wants us to kind of make these types of stories. It's an interesting question. I don't know if there's a definite answer there.
Well, the alternative, or one of the alternatives, would be that maybe there is a truth there.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a universal truth that people are kind of getting at, even before there's scientific exploration and real handing down the knowledge effectively through the written language. Maybe there's some fundamental truth to the struggle between good and evil, and lightness and darkness, and that not just a psychological or element to, or kind of like wishful thinking, or something that humans need. Although I think there is some truth that there is a human desire for religion. That's kind of a separate subject. But
yeah.
Maybe there's just some truth to it.
True. That's another good thought, another good theory.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome.
I worked really hard on that.
I'm sure you did. Spent many hours laboring over that one.
Well, we're making fun of it, but these are things that I'm sure you'll be thinking about when you're in your 50s.
No, I mean, I do agree. I have thought these things.
Teenager, that's the kind of stuff I was thinking about, and you kind of never. I mean, well, maybe other people. Let me not be so egotistical. I think most people, the vast majority of people, think about these kind of. Well, do I believe what I believe because I believe it, or because I think I should believe it, or because I feel like there's some innate need for me to believe it that is just like when I have to scratch an itch type of thing, or maybe a little more complex, of course. But those are fundamental questions of belief, understanding, and faith.
Yes. I mean, I didn't mean to discredit you. I mean, I've thought about these things, a whole bunch. I mean, when we're going through all these mythologies, because I mean, we're both Catholics. We of course believe in, the Christian God. So it's kind of like, my frame of thinking is like, they're close. These ancient peoples, these mythological storytellers, they definitely have some of the right ideas. They have some of the truths. But it's interesting to think, how did they get to these truths? How did they come up with these things? Did they just look around the world? Were they inspired that way? Did they see something else? Did they see something, more metaphysical, I guess, and then just take that in a different direction than the way that, God intended? But again, that's just my soapbox, my sort of ideas there.
And there's also a need for order among chaos, so I think there's some constants in human society, and of course nature is chaotic and it's difficult, and we have it so easy, but even having it easy, it's difficult. I mean, like we have it the easiest of all humans in all human history, with our wealth and ability to avoid hunger and, for the most part, violence.
True.
But still, life's a struggle. Psychologically. I mean, there's always something to be down about or frustrated with, or that stuff. And so some of these things are universal in that sense. It's always this order from chaos, and these morality stories. They get together and kill the bad dude, and but the bad stuff never really completely goes away.
True.
The one giant escapes, got a wife. He's going to make a whole bunch of new bad, evil giants, and it's like a forever fight. Now, we got to that, but maybe it was in the introduction about Ragnarok. I think that is kind of different, and as the author points out, how at the end you have to fight. You have to have such a big fight that it destroys the world. The fight destroys the world, and then you get renewed, and everybody's happy. Everybody, I guess, that survives the Ragnarok, I guess, or maybe it's everybody. I don't know.
We'll get to the stories of Ragnarok in a couple episodes from here, but brief summary of Ragnarok. The majority of the gods die. The majority of the giants die. Basically, it's kind of like a one-to-one thing. Each god sort of has their giant or their monster that they have to kill, and they both kill each other for the most part, except for a couple gods. One god's reborn, and then humanity, just a pair of humans, began anew, like on a new Earth, essentially. But we'll get to Ragnarok a little bit later. There's a lot of interesting symbolism in Ragnarok, but we can save our thoughts there for a couple episodes down the road. So stay tuned, all of our listeners. But the next story is that of Night and Day. It was decided that the horses of the sun and moon needed some leadership, and so the beautiful children of the giant Muldalfari, Mani, the moon, and Sol, the sun, were given the direction of the chariots. The daughter of the giant Norvi, Note, or Night, was provided with a black chariot pulled by Hrimfaxi, or Frostmane, from whose mane frost and dew fell down to earth. Nott had 3 children, each with a different father. From Naglfari she had a son named Aud. From Anar came Jord, meaning earth, and from Delingr came Dag, meaning day. And Dag was the most radiant, and so was given his own chariot, pulled by Shinfaxi, or Shining Mane. And as they traveled, beams of light lit up the world. The chariots all flew quickly, for they were pursued by 2 wolves, Shoal, repulsion, and Hati, or hatred, who wanted to create eternal darkness. Mani brought with him in his chariot Huki, the waxing moon, and Bil, the waning moon, and summer and winter became the rulers of all seasons. Summer was a warm and pleasant god, but winter was an enemy, and the frost giant Hreisvalgr sat in the extreme north, blowing the frozen winds across the land. So basically just another story here of just, this is how things are. Here's why the sun and the moon move across the world, because they're pursued by these giant wolves. But I do think it's interesting here. A lot of mythologies, I'm kind of interested in how the cosmology of this works, because you have 4 different chariots. You don't just have the sun and the moon creating night and day. You have the sun, the moon, night, and day. So it's interesting that they have like 2 separate deities for these things. It's not just the sun creates day. It's the sun and day are 2 separate things. So it's interesting. I don't know of a lot of other cultures that have that. This sort of distinction there, but it's a very interesting distinction. I'm not entirely sure what to make of it, but very fascinating.
Hard to figure out. Maybe they're layered.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's going to be overlap.
Yeah,
but it's not completely. I mean, I guess you see day starting to come, and then the chariot with the sun comes around. Because the light precedes the actual sunrise.
True. I guess that's true. And I guess when it's cloudy, there's still light out, even though you can't see the sun. It's lighter than it is during night. So I guess it does make a certain amount of sense.
Yes.
Nice. I guess you don't have any other thoughts on the sun and the moon?
No, they're there. And the chariots was very similar to the, ancient Greeks and Romans, isn't it? Didn't they have a chariot pulling the sun?
I believe so. Helios, I know, pulled the sun in a chariot, I think. I'm not sure about the moon, but I'm sure it was something similar.
Yeah, I don't think the moon. I always think it's the sun.
Yeah. Yeah. But it is interesting. I like hearing all the names here. There's lots of names. I like the Norwegian language. I like Old Norse, so it's fun to read all these names. But that's one of the other things that I really like about Norse mythologies is because there's just a lot of names that are dropped, and you're not like told anything about them, like even in the most original text that we have. So you're kind of just left to wonder, what are the other stories that we're told about these gods? These are apparently important enough names to kind of list here to describe. So it's kind of just like, it's fun to think about, what could have been, what these stories are that we don't know about. It's one of my favorite things about Norse mythology. Kind of similar to Tolkien in a way, actually, where he just kind of alludes to things in the far off past. He doesn't really describe them, but the characters, all know about these big names of hundreds of years ago. So it's kind of a similar thing that you're seeing here in Norse mythology.
Way to force that Tolkien reference in there. It was a good job.
Thank you. Well, Tolkien was actually very, very inspired by Norse mythology. I'm surprised I've made it this far without mentioning this.
Wasn't he a big fan of the Norse mythology?
He was. The names of the 13 dwarves in The Hobbit were actually taken directly from a poem in the Poetic Edda, I believe.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he didn't make those up. He just pulled them straight out. And Gandalf was actually a name in there, but Gandalf was the name of a dwarf in the Poetic Edda, interestingly enough.
References to dwarves in this chapter.
Yes, lots of dwarfs. Not dwarfs, because Tolkien was the one who really, popularized the spelling of dwarfs with a V-E, because technically the correct way, really before Tolkien's time, was dwarfs in the English language. He had like so much... What?
FS?
Yeah, like FS, like it's written here. And so, like, he had so many struggles with his publishers because they're like, this is wrong, you need to edit this. And then he said, well, no, this is, like, more archaic, really. Don't edit my work. This is how I want it to be written. And so he had huge problems with that. And also elves to elves with a V instead of an F. So really the reason that we're so acquainted with elves and dwarves versus elves and dwarfs was because of Tolkien. Really, technically in English, they should be with an FS.
It's funny. His publisher said, that those words aren't real. When you're describing elves and dwarves and Middle Earth, land that did not exist.
Yes, kind of ironic. Very ironic, actually.
That's exactly the kind of question you'd have with an editor, copy editor, or any sort of bureaucrat.
Yes, very true.
I can make up my own words. The people will understand.
All right, the next story is that of the first humans. Odin, the king of all gods, was walking with his counterparts Honir and Lothar, or Loki, and they came to a beach on which lay two pieces of driftwood, and Honir and Loki stood over them, their shadows making the wood appear to have arms and legs. Odin then blew a divine breath into them, the wood stripping away to reveal a naked man and woman who both lay perfectly still. Odin had given them life, becoming entities with a soul and mind, and Loki now had to transfer his gifts, and so he gave the woman the blush of youth, the power of comprehension, and the five senses. Loki then gave the man blood, giving him the same gifts as the woman, and Honir then gave them speech. They began to set out hand in hand. Odin then told them to stop, naming the man Ash and the woman Elm, then draping his cloak over the woman, sending her on her way, safe in the care of man, who would continue in that role until the end of time. So this is one of the only times that humanity is ever mentioned in Norse mythology, like in the myths about the gods themselves. Norse mythology is interestingly mostly focused on the gods and not the humans. Humans pop up in a couple, important sagas, but in terms of like stories that actually deal with the gods, humans very, very rarely appear, interestingly.
That is wild. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because so many other myths from around the world, all worldly myths, reference interactions with the gods.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Repeatedly, and most of the stories are, how they deal with humans or kill humans or save humans or whatever.
Yeah, but pretty much for the most part, until you get into like the sagas, humans aren't mentioned. It's just the gods amongst themselves and with the giants, pretty much. And this is also the story that I had one slight issue with, because it said that Odin's brothers, Honir and Loki, where in reality, Norse mythology as we kind of know it, this is going to be a long tangent, really... what we have is kind of the last sort of phase of Norse mythology. We can kind of trace it back where there were just sort of cycles of gods, and we can see them kind of like phased out for each other, essentially. And so that, Odin, Honir, and Loki kind of replaced Odin, Vili, and Ve in an earlier mythology. And so with the scraps that we have, we can kind of like reconstruct these past mythologies. And so you see this sort of like three-part, deity structure that's appeared a couple times. But Odin, Vili, and Ve only appear really in that creation myth, and then it's from then on it's kind of Odin, Honir, and Loki, and then kind of Loki, Thor, and varying other gods, usually Heimdall with them as kind of a trio going on from there. So it's kind of interesting that the studies that have been done to try and figure out, which are the actual oldest Norse gods, which are kind of replacing other gods. Odin is one of the oldest gods that we know of. Thor is older, and you can kind of like trace his roots back in a different direction. He wasn't originally, Odin's son. He was a different, separate deity. Some people think that it was Odin, Thor, and another god at some point as kind of the original trio at one point in time. But that's one of the very fascinating things about Norse mythology is you kind of peel it back in layers, and that there's layers of newer and older mythologies kind of stacked on top of each other that are kind of gradually phased out over time. And I'm sure this is something that's common in other mythologies, but it's especially noticeable, I know about it in Norse mythology, which is very fun to look into. You look disappointed.
I have a couple thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Number one, our viewer can't really see you.
Yes.
It's our viewer. But during that long side note about these gods, you had to move your hair out of your eyes at least 13 times. Need a haircut, cut off that hair. It is distracting. And I forget what Sam was talking about when he was in town last time. I forget what he said. It was really
my brother Sam, for the listener's sake.
Well, your listener knows who Sam is. Are out there, and she knows who she is. But otherwise, what was I going to say? Oh, I was going to say about this story.
Well, hold on. What did Sam have to say about my hair? You didn't say what he had to say about my hair.
It was funny. I'll remember it later. I'll text it to you.
All right.
It was not terribly disparaging.
Fantastic.
But why do you think the first man and woman were made from driftwood? Is there some meaning behind that?
I don't know. That's one of the at least to me, one of the big mysteries. It's not made from the earth necessarily. I guess you can kind of see it as, a combination of everything that is on earth, I guess. The trees originally have to grow, from the ground. Eventually that tree dies, goes into the ocean. So it's kind of a blending of everything, that one tree has essentially taken from all the elements, essentially. But beyond that, that's just my theory. I don't really know why it's characterized as driftwood here.
Did you just come up with that off the top of your head, or have you actually thought about that?
I just came up with that off the top of my head.
Because I think that's a possible explanation, but I was thinking that driftwood is both something that is both discarded and possibly very valuable, because it's something that's just drifting along in the ocean and cast about, and not something that has been, it grew before, but now it's just in the sea and then washed ashore. Now, on the other hand, driftwood can be very valuable. It's something almost like a treasure that's been washed randomly onto shore, and you're just lucky to get it, because then you could use it for something, assuming it's a large enough piece of wood. But I guess they're a seagoing people, and so maybe it has some sort of different value than, say, I would, somebody living close to the edge of the Mississippi, and nobody in our area is going to want to pull anything out of that body of water and make anything good out of it, unless we're really adventurous.
Yeah, I didn't think about that. That's a really good theory.
Well, I was hoping you had an idea, being the Norse mythology. You need to write a paper on that, on the driftwood thing.
Yeah, I could write a paper on the driftwood thing. You're very correct.
Or find out the answer.
And
report back.
I could. I'm actually doing my own research. I told you about that. That's coming up in a couple weeks. I'll be presenting research on an undocumented language. So that's something to look forward to.
Well, I believe that you would have to fail, because once you present the research on the undocumented language, you would have documented it, thereby making it now a documented language.
That is true. It's a paradox. This is an issue.
So are you done with that research? Are you ready to present it?
I'm still working on my PowerPoint presentation itself. I'll have that done this week, and then the presentation's next week. So that's something to look forward to. So is it a bunch of clicks and whistles? It is. That is not what it is at all, actually. But no? Yes, and that is not clicks and whistles. No, it is a variety of the Berber languages of North Africa, which are an Afro-Asiatic language. The family that includes Hebrew and Arabic. So it's a very, very small language spoken by maybe 20-ish people, by the native speaker's best estimate. But it's an interesting language, very, very fascinating, if you will. But it's been a lot of fun. Is it very close to another language? Is it it's not a, what do you call that? Where you just have a dialect. It's not a dialect. It's actually a separate language. So it's probably not a dialect. There's two. So it's a language spoken in Egypt. There's two, as far as I know, two Berber languages spoken in two different oases, I guess is the plural of oasis. One in the Siwa Oasis and one in the Kara Oasis. So people know about the one in the Siwa Oasis, spoken by about 20,000 people. And then 75 kilometers northeast is the Kara Oasis, which is where the native speaker was from. And so it's Karan Berbers is what we've called it. But he claims that it's not mutually intelligible. So if he was to hear Siwi Berber from the Siwa Oasis, he could not understand it. So it's probably not a dialect. They're probably very closely related. I know nothing about Siwi Berber. It's very little documented. None of the Berber languages really have much documentation. The one that is most documented is Moroccan Berber, which is on the complete other end of the continent, basically on the other side of the, several countries away from Egypt. But yeah, it's been very fascinating to learn about this language.
So I assume this person is bilingual.
Yes, multilingual, speaks a lot of languages.
Are you sure that he didn't just make this one up?
I thought about that.
Did you?
Well, when somebody says, "Hey, here's an undocumented language," you're of course a little suspicious at first. But the more I think about it, the more data that you get, and you see how interconnected it is to other languages, and the complexity that it has. It's pretty much impossible to really fake a language. The most accurate, the most complete, actual fictional languages that people have made, i.e. Tolkien. They have taken literal lifetimes to make, several decades of just working on this one thing. So it's very, very unlikely that this is a made-up language. And the native speaker was actually really worried about that. He was like, I don't want to get you in any trouble. What if you present this at a conference or whatever, and people are like, "You're lying, you made this up." And he's like, he was really worried about this, but I reassured him, like, trust me, anybody who is any sort of self-respecting linguist would not think that you made this up. I assure you. So.
Well, I wonder if it'd be more impressive.
That's what I said too. I'm like, well, then it's almost more impressive. I found this guy who's made this own, his own language. It's like really robust and interesting, but different topic of study, I guess. But yeah.
Right. All right. We have to get back to our topic.
Yes, that was a complete tangent. The next story is about Asgard. Asgard, or the enclosure of the gods, was built on Yggdrasil above the clouds and centered above Midgard, and it had many palaces built for pleasure, the first of which was Gladsheim, or joyous home, and it housed the thrones of the 12 principal deities, and everything was cast of gold. A second palace was built for the goddesses, and this was Vingolf, or friendly floor. A council was held, and it was decreed that no blood would be shed in Asgard, and a forge was built to create the tools for the construction of the palace. To get to the council, a rainbow bridge, known as the Bifrost, was created, and it stretched over Midgard in splendid colors. The center of Asgard was the plain of Idavale, and the palaces were set in its green grasses. One was Breibalik, or broad gleaming, and one was Glitmir, made in gold and silver. And the beauty of Asgard was reflected in its inhabitants, the Aesir. There was another family of gods, the Vanir of Vanaheim, and war was waged between the two, until they learned their power in uniting. And to ratify their treaty, gods were exchanged, and so the Vanir Nord came to live with Frey and Freya in Asgard, and Honir went to live in Vanaheim. So that is the story of how Asgard was constructed, a little bit about these palaces and about the gods who lived there. Going back to my other tangent earlier about sort of the layers of Norse mythology, this is one of the other key things that is kind of, shown as, there were different layers of gods and stuff here with the Aesir and the Vanir. We only get a very brief glimpse at the difference between the two in like the Norse mythology we have now. They're kind of treated as the same. There's really no major difference between, the characteristics of the Vanir and the Aesir. They're all just kind of the gods. But, it's theorized that way back in the past, these were two separate sort of pantheons of gods, perhaps maybe constructed by two different peoples, maybe sort of kind of conglomerated together, and over the years in the Norse mythology that we have, they all kind of became one homogenous group, kind of all the gods in Asgard. But there was definitely a difference between the two that is just not seen anymore. It's another one of those mysteries where a lot of people, wish they could go back and sort of see where this distinction was many, many years ago. But unfortunately, we cannot do that. What are your thoughts on Asgard, this home of the gods?
Well, they had to have a rule that like no bloodshed would be spilled in there, so it was like a John Wick safe house.
Well, unfortunately, there will be bloodshed. I'm sure we'll hear about that in a couple stories from now, in some future episodes.
Got the idea because he murdered somebody in John Wick 2. In the safe, I forget. I don't know if they called it safe house. Do you know? Have you?
Yeah, I've seen the first one, the first John Wick. You're not allowed because the Assassins Guild or whatever it is, they're not allowed to kill anybody.
Guild building. They have these guild buildings, almost like embassies in various cities. And you're in there, you can't murder somebody in there. So even though you're hired to kill that person, as soon as they step in there, then you can't kill them. Well, John Wick broke the rules.
Yeah.
So the author of that probably stole it from Asgard.
Yeah, probably. Well, little known fact: Keanu Reeves was actually a Norse god. He was worshipped by the Vikings.
Oh, was he?
Yeah, he was. That is a fact. No need to look it up. Just believe me. That is true. All right. The last what?
He is not Baba Yaga. He is the man you sent to kill Baba Yaga.
You mean Baba Yaga?
The boogeyman.
Yeah, Baba Yaga, the Russian boogeyman.
That's right.
How did you pronounce it?
I don't know.
Boba Yaga?
I don't know.
That sounds like a Star Wars character.
Boba Fett.
Boba Fett? Boba Yaga?
Yeah, Boba Yaga. Boba Yaga doesn't have the jetpack to the air. He's got a thing that shoots him underneath beds. That makes him Baba Yaga.
Well, even, this is actually weirder than what you just said. Baba Yaga, the actual sort of witch figure in Russian mythology, lived in a house that had chicken legs. So there's that for you, and it walked around and stomped on people.
Huh.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem as frightening as it should be. I don't know.
Yeah, it's kind of funny, actually.
You throw a rock and break its leg or something.
Yeah, you could. The last story in this section.
That was kind of a paraphrase from John Wick.
Oh, was it?
What I was saying.
Oh, I didn't catch that.
Oh, there's like the most important scenes in the movie. So John Wick he was an assassin for the Russian mafia or whatever. That's his backstory. But he had fallen in love with a gal and she dies, I think, from cancer or something. But she had gifted him, I guess, on her deathbed, a little puppy dog.
Yeah,
and that kept him from going into such a deep depression or coming out of the depression. And so these crooks break into his house, steal his car, and kill his dog. And so then the word gets back to the mafia kingpin guy, who is the guy who killed the dog. It's his dad. And so his dad punches him and strikes him repeatedly. And the kid's like, what did I do? I just stole this guy's dog. And he says, you stole John Wick's dog. He says, what is he, the boogeyman? He says, boogeyman? He says, no, he is not the Baba Yaga, or however you say it.
Baba Yaga.
Baba Yaga? He's the one you send to kill Baba Yaga.
Thank you for that analysis of the plot of John Wick. That was very helpful.
Your listener may not know that one. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe not. The last story in this section about the Norse creation myths describes Yggdrasil. Yggdrasil is the world ash, and the 9 worlds are connected by its branches. Its roots are tended by the Norns, or Fates, 3 powerful sisters. The roots are nourished by 3 wells. One root reaches Asgard and feeds from the well of Weird, and the second root leads to Jotunheim, where it is fed by the well of Mimir, who was once a god, but only his head remains today, drinking daily from the well. And Mimir represents great wisdom, and even Odin traveled there to find answers to profound questions. The third root goes to Filheim, where it is fed by Vergelmir, the fountain of black water, and here the root is poisoned and damaged, for the dragon Nithog gnaws at it. There was once a time when Odin wished to know the secret of writing runes. In order to acquire this, a great sacrifice must be undergone. So Odin hung himself from the branches of Yggdrasil, swinging in the anarchy of the dark winds for 9 days, and his screams were so terrible that all the gods covered their ears. However, Odin prevailed, gaining the knowledge of runes, and his wisdom became legendary. Now for the one and only time from this section, I'm going to read directly from the book, in this last paragraph. Hey, I held off this long. This is the one time.
All right.
Odin was at the helm of the 9 worlds, which stretched from Asgard in the topmost branches to the world of Hel down below at the lowest root. In between were the worlds of Vanir, called Vanaheim, Midgard, where humans lived, as well as the worlds of the light elves, the dark elves, the dwarfs, the frost and hill giants, and at last the fire giants of Muspel. The most magnificent, and the world we hear the most about, was Asgard, and it is here that our story begins. But unfortunately, that is where the last story of this section ends. I will have to hear more about the stories themselves in the next couple episodes, so make sure you stick around, our listeners out there, if there are multiple. But yeah, the concept of Yggdrasil is one of the most, I guess, sort of famous, sort of well-known things about Norse mythology. It's very interesting, sort of the distinction between these 9 worlds that are all connected by this big tree. It's not much is known about some of the worlds. Again, kind of going back to the lost information about previous Norse myths. But it's definitely a neat idea that you do have these separate planes of existence that are known for housing these sorts of creatures, all housed by this, or all connected by this giant tree that is prophesied to essentially burn down or collapse. You have this dragon gnawing at its roots, and there's other characters that live in the tree and stuff. But it's a fascinating idea.
Yeah, kind of like not parallel universes, but like different worlds. That's I think an odd concept in mythology. Mm-hmm. And I have a very hard time listening to anything you say because of your hair. So either you're gonna have to put a headband on next time.
Oh my God!
some rubber bands up there, stuff out of your face, because you don't know you're doing it. You have no idea how often you're using your right hand to pull that hair out of your eye.
I don't. I don't even recognize myself doing it. It's just the way that the headphones sit on my head. They push this flap of hair like over my eyes.
I'm gonna count next time. We're gonna have a running tally.
Yes. Well.
Other than that, brilliant thoughts.
Oh, thank you.
Well, all I can think of was, he's doing it again. He's doing it again. That's all that's going on. Oh, there he did it again.
Oh man. But it was unfair of me to actually say listener earlier, because we've actually been doing pretty well in downloads. For the first time in podcast history, I checked this. We are going, at least in the next couple days, we're going to go a full 30 days with getting at least one download every day. That's not something we've done before. We've gotten to like 25, 26, and then like we just hit a day where like nobody downloads anything. So we're like at 200 downloads in the past 30 days. So we're doing pretty well. Yeah.
Who are these people?
I don't know, but apparently they like to listen to us talk for hours on end. Let us know who you are. You can follow us on Twitter, actually, at ULMTD Opinions. That's ULMTD Opinions on Twitter. That was a good transition there. I worked that one in pretty well.
Very good. Yes, our Twitter handle is blowing up. All the comments from all the listeners.
Yes. We nobody comments on our Twitter. I post to an empty crowd on Twitter. Every week I post when our episodes are live. So if you want to keep updated, that's a good way to stay updated. But other than that, yeah.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. I haven't noticed the tweets. I wonder if I unfollowed you by mistake. I only have Twitter to lurk. Read other people's posts or their links and stuff. I don't ever post.
Yeah.
And I got locked out of Facebook this week.
Did you?
Yeah, but it wasn't really a bad thing. They wanted me to like authenticate myself again. I've had this thing for I don't know how long, and I don't go on very often, and it kept giving me an alert. Like, you have to authenticate yourself. I said, I'm not going to authenticate myself. I'm not locked out. I don't care. I'm never going to authenticate me. I know who I am. I have to authenticate myself. I mean, really, what is the point of that? So that I can't communicate with people on a social media site? Nobody believes anything anyway, and I won't be able to see all the old ladies post like Trump rants. I've eliminated any liberals from my social media feed anyway, so I have old ladies that have like Trump memes, and then like pictures of their cats and stuff. Guys don't post, so and I started wondering, why am I even on this stupid thing? Am I really even a man? If I'm on Facebook, am I a man, like a real man, not like some Facebook posting, weirdo? And the answer is, now I am a man. I'm off Facebook. They think that it's like a punishment to lock me out, so I have to give them like some sort of identifying information, but it's a reward. I'm liberated.
Congratulations! I'm very proud of you that you've come this far. You've achieved this great accomplishment. I'm very proud.
So now I'm thinking about doing like I have to look into like Substack or something where I can be an author. Like I actually put my rants in a long form. I bet you I could get some subscribers to that.
Oh, you're gonna get a cult following.
I could be a cult leader.
I think you're describing like an online manifesto. I think that is exactly what you were describing.
Well, a manifesto, I think, is one big document.
That is true.
I'm going to be having a series. So it's I don't know what you call a manifesto that's in chapters.
I think just a manifesto. I think that's the same thing. I think it's just a manifesto split into chunks. Oh man.
With self-publishing, you can publish your own manifestos. Maybe I just title it Mark's Manifesto, and that'll be, because I don't know what Substack is really, but I see that there's a lot of independent media going to it, so they don't get censored. And it's some sort of subscription-based thing. So of course I don't read any of them because I'm not going to pay anybody for their talent. All right, so I don't know what I'm really going to do, but I'm thinking that maybe titling it Mark's Manifesto may not be a great thing. It's almost like threatening or somewhat psychotic.
A little bit.
but then it may sell better that way.
Yeah, well, when you do get your cult following, make sure you advertise the podcast. Tell them to download here, and they can get more of your thoughts. So your little cult following can really get invested in what's going on.
That's cross merchandising.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think that's about all the time that we have left for this episode. I've been Adam Bishop, he's been Mark Bishop, and this has been Unlimited Opinions. Of course, make sure you follow us on Twitter at ULMTD Opinions. That's ULMTD Opinions.